Hello everyone. I've seen a lot of discussion in different scrap mechanic forums as to how to achieve proper airplane flight. So today I want to show you my take on the whole airplane flying thing and how I try to solve the different problems, especially with the scrap mechanic physics that obviously don't involve different aspects of aerodynamics. So you can't simply have a wing and let it produce lift and that way take off the ground. All you can do is use a lot of thrusters, as you can see here, and that will lift them off the ground. Then you can go forward, and that's basically how most of the people do it, to get airplanes off the air and just moving like they are supposed to. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way to do it, because although we only have thrusters to achieve lift in this game, basically all there is to airplane flying is its forces acting on a body, on a certain mass in the air that has a center of gravity and forces acting around this center of gravity and causing movements, and that's all there is to it. So I thought maybe we can try to simulate this, all these forces acting on an airplane. And it's really not that many. There are four main forces acting on an airplane, which are the lift, pointing straight up, lifting the airplane off the ground, obviously. There's the weight, which is putting the airplane down, and in straight and level flight, these forces are equal. And we have a certain amount of thrust, pulling the airplane forward, and a certain amount of drag, resulting from the air resistance of the whole body and wing structure. And these forces are also equal, so they cancel each other out. And what we have is an accelerated flight in one direction. And it gets a bit more complicated when turning, but really it can be broken down to grade 5 or 6 mathematics, like geometry. Yeah, all that happens is when you roll the plane, let's say to the left, and this wing goes down, the lift vector doesn't point straight up anymore. It points towards the center of the turn, right? So you have to produce a bit more lift to counteract the weight vector, and a little bit of excess lift that points straight towards the center of the turn and basically turns the plane around the corner. And it's not that many forces we have to simulate for a plane in scrap mechanics to actually fly like a plane. And yeah, so let's go into the details. And I just want to express my thought process, so to say, and hopefully someone will see this and say, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but there is a better way to do it. And then, I don't know, we can start talking about this and in the end build a really good plane that flies like a plane, hopefully. So anyways, on this basis, it's doesn't need much explanation what I did here in my first take on airplane flying. We have a big grid of thrusters that are pointing downwards, which produce the lift, and they are located where the wings are located, because the center of gravity in this plane is around here. I'm going to go into the details of all of that a bit later. But yeah, it lifts the plane off the ground, so we can fly. We have two engines with thrusters pointing backwards, which produce the thrust forward, like in the rear plane. And the steering is also pretty much standard. I tried to use the glitch steering, but it was just too laggy. It was unflyable with the glitch steering, so I had to use thrusters like basically everybody else. It's the same setup more or less in every plane you see in the workshop. we have a couple of thrusters in the back and in the front, which are there to pitch the plane up and down. So thrusters pointing downwards to lift the nose, pointing downwards uh, to put the nose down, and all of that in reverse moves the tail up and down. And we have additional thrusters for left and right to yaw, which is the rudder function, and the same in the front, pushing the nose left and right. Last thing is the roll thrusters, which are located here, pointing up and down, and they just go in different directions. So one's going up and one is going down, and this rolls the plane into the turn. And this works quite well. It just works as it's intended to do. So you can roll, you can pitch, you can yaw. I try to make kind of a throttle that's connected to the W and the S keys that turns these thrusters on in sequence. So you have 8 different power settings, and it works good. It works good. Sometimes it gets stuck and you get stuck with a single power setting. That's kind of annoying. Overall, we get some problems with things getting stuck inside each other. That's why there are no doors and as less movable parts as possible. So the gear is raisable and the doors shut, but that's about it apart from the flaps. No more moving parts. So this plane is leg free for the most part, but it's not very fancy when it comes to moving parts. So it just gets the job done. Which fits because it is a freighter, so not much luxury, but a lot of space. Good. So we can watch all of what's happening around the plane in flight and in the different stages of flight. Just as forces or vectors of forces acting on a mass that has a center of gravity. So these lifters are located near the center of gravity, so they don't cause any pitching up or down, but push the center straight up and yeah, don't do anything else. And the pitch and the yaw controls, or yeah, the thrusters for that are located far from the center of gravity, so they have a long arm and use their force. So if they were located near the center of gravity, the turning wouldn't be so good, just so fast, because there's less how is it called in English? Is it momentum? Is it turning momentum? Does that make any sense? The force of turning basically is much greater when there's a longer distance between the center of gravity and the force acting. Yeah, it's simple physics. Yeah, but I thought to myself that's not really how it works, is it? Because where do the forces on the plane come from? You have to ask, and the answer is for the lift. Obviously, it's doing so. So this pad is located correctly. It's basically where the wing is at its thickest. Okay, I put it a little bit to the front for balancing reasons, but it should be where the wing is the thickest, because that's where the most lift is produced. So, but yeah, that's in the right spot. And also the engines, obviously, if the force is coming from the engines, it's in the right spot. As for these pitch and yaw thrusters, they are pretty much in the right place, because what happens in a plane is as you pitch this surface up and down, which this plane can't do, but it does in real life, it directs the oncoming air upwards and downwards, and therefore pushes the whole thing. The counteracting force just pushes the whole thing up or down. So these are correct, and also for the yaw, because the rudder does the same thing, just in another dimensional plane. But these ones are the problem, because in the real airplane there's no force generated at this part of the body. The whole thing just rotates and the nose follows it, but there's no active force pushing it upward. So I had to solve this, and I thought, yeah, what happens if you pitch the nose up and down? Uh, the air is coming from this direction, pretty much straightforward, but the plane rotates, right? The nose pitches up, and so the whole thing rotates, and the wing will end up at a steeper angle towards the oncoming air. So in aviation, they call it the angle of attack. It's basically the angle between the airflow and just the long line of the wing, right? So in normal flight, we have a pretty low angle of attack. There's enough lift produced to keep the plane in the air, and we're just flying. But what happens when we pitch the tail down, and therefore the nose up? The angle of attack is increased, and therefore the air is accelerated much more brutally towards the ground, and also the lift, the whole lift dynamics. I don't want to go into the details of that on the upper wings, but it's all increased, so we have more lift, and this is what actually lifts this part of the plane, the wing part, up actively, and pushes the tail part down. This is what happens, and the same thing happens in reverse if you pitch the tail up. You decrease the angle of attack, and therefore you decrease the lift. And so this is not actively pushed down, rather than falling down, because not enough lift is produced to keep the whole thing in the air. So it starts to gradually fall out of the air at this point and gets raised more in the air at this point. And that's pitching in an airplane. And the rudder, all it does is push the tail to the left and the right. There's no force acting at the front, except if we are on the ground, because we have a front wheel of the ground that it's turning. It also pushes the nose left and right, so we can use that to our advantage. But yeah, that's all there is to it, and obviously in this plane it's well solved, but it's not perfectly solved, and it's more important than that, it's not solved as it is solved in real life. And yeah, I came up with this. This is version number 1.5, let's say, of this plane. I made it a bit shorter, so it resembles the 737-700 rather than the 800, mainly for practical reasons. So it's a bit lighter, and also you can pitch the nose further up without the tail hitting the ground, because the thing is longer. It hits the ground earlier, and that was always a problem with this one. If you pitch up too high and hit the ground, the whole thing will just stop in midair because of the friction, because blocks glitch into each other, and it doesn't make for a very good landing and takeoff if that happens. So yeah, the shorter thing just rotates more smoothly, and it's just easier to handle and not to tail strike. But more importantly, I also made some changes to this actual thruster setup and how the whole thing works. So this is about version 1.5 of this plane, and at this stage, the only real difference is the length of the plane, and that it looks a little more cleaned up, so not as chaotic as this one, which is in part because it is not complete yet, so there are a few systems still missing, and in part because I try to improve lots of what's happening here. So I'm just gonna despawn this one. because we might run into some issues if we move both of these at the same time on the same map, because they're quite complicated. So let's get rid of this one. And yeah, I'm gonna show you the new systems that I built that aim to make this thing more realistically acting, so to speak. So as I mentioned on the 737-800, we want to get rid of the thrusters in front, and as you see, I did that. There are no thrusters left here, except for 2 turning thrusters that are here because there is a steerable wheel, and so these one activate as well, as long as the plane is on the ground. When the plane is up in the air, these are disconnected basically, and only the tail thrusters will fire. Yeah, and as you see, these are much closer spaced together, and that's because I used the mod pack with the micro thrusters, just because it's so much more convenient to have those little ones, especially if you don't need much power, and you have to have this big 2 by 2 by 4 block just for a little force. And yeah, that's why I used the mods in this one, mainly because of the thrusters. I didn't use much else from the mod pack. But yeah, so these thrusters are fine. Okay, we have this one, and these are doing their jobs. But I also had to solve this thruster pad thing, because of the thrust increasing and decreasing depending on the angle of attack of the plane, basically depending on the pitch of the plane. And the way I try to solve this is I build a little computer. Oh, I don't know if I can call it a computer. Can you call it a computer? It's a bunch of logic gates doing stuff and getting an input, checking stuff, and producing an output. So it's a really, really simple computer. And all it does is it takes control inputs. So these are your primary flight controls here, and some sensory inputs, and convert them to lift outputs. And this resembles the lift grid. I have this one also set up here, like spread out, not really to explain the different connections, because frankly it's been a few days and I can't really remember what I did here. But yeah, just to show you in practice what's happening. So yeah, I should say at this point that at least my planes always use 2-hand steering. So you have to let go of the mouse to fly this thing properly, because airplane flight is controlled around 3 axes and 1 thrust vector that's also variable. So you need many controls, and I didn't come up to this day with a solution to simplify it that much that it still flies like an airplane and you only use 1-hand control. But as it is quite stable in the air, you can let go of the control for a few seconds and just look around and reset the camera angle. That's no problem at this stage. So yeah, I'm gonna show you this one, which converts the inputs, the control inputs, into thruster pad outputs. All it does is we have this row basically that is always on. So in this row, the thrusters are always on, at least in the middle. This row is on by default, but turned off when the 8 key is pressed. So when the nose down key is pressed, they turn off and the lift is reduced and the whole thing starts to fall. And this row only is activated when the 5 key or the nose up key is pressed. So we have more lift, and the whole thing lifts up while the tail is being pushed down. And that's basically it. And for the row controls, now I really shouldn't do it here. I have this whole thing set up, so I think it's better if we do it in the actual thing. So let's do this now. Sorry, I should have done that from the beginning. So what I've done here is I just have the normal driving seat connected to these buttons, and as you can see, they are laid out like the number pad, and that's for a reason. We have 3 button inputs. In the real thing, we at least I do take these buttons for, let's say, the lights, the gear, and the flaps. And the yellow button always being my master button in all of these things, so I know which button to connect which with which input. And yeah, this is your primary flight controls, controlling the pitch up, down, and the roll commands. Yeah, so what's left is the yaw commands and the throttle setting, and I got these one normally on the WASD. So both of my hands are in use for flying, but the flight is how do I put it? It's satisfactory. It does meet certain requirements of airplane flight, which are far from perfect. I admit that, but I think we're getting there. We're getting there slowly. So I connected these buttons to these lights just so we can, if we press any button, we can see it. And these buttons are connected with the input grid, which is the same as the input grid here. This is all the logic that's inside of it, just spread out, and that's going to an array of lights which resembles the thruster pad. So we are having a top view. We're looking on the wing, so to speak, and upwards would be the direction of the flight. Does that? I hope that makes enough sense, so you guys understand what I like my thought process. Okay, so these buttons here are in this example, because we don't have an actual airplane to do it with, resemble the sensory inputs we have in the actual plane. So this one being the sensor at the nose gear. We have a sensor at the nose gear that basically, yeah, just senses the ground and senses if the nose gear is on the ground. And the same thing we have for the main gear. So it senses the main gear on the ground. On the ground. And this middle sensor is the sensor for the thrust setting. So this will activate if we have a high thrust setting in the other plane. I deleted it, so there's no reason to look over there. In the other plane, I had 8 thrust settings, and when it went higher or equal to the 7th setting, so setting 7 or 8, would indicate a takeoff or go-round power setting, and this sensor would light up and it would do different things to the logic. Yeah, this is all taken into this little circuit, which builds up the main switch for the thrust. So if this is off, there's no thrust, no lift, and if this is on, there is lift of some sort on this pad. But this is really the main key for the lift. Yeah. So I want to show you how this works. So for this to work, we have to activate the main key, the main switch, and we have to get off the ground. That's it. So as you can see, this resembles straight and level flight, so we don't want any movement up or down. We want to just keep it level. And this is the regular setting. These are lit up in straight and level flight, and these should be sufficient to keep the plane in the air. What's nice about this is that you can increase and decrease the number of lights in this case, or thrusters in this case, as you wish. So you can always make this wider or higher, or basically longer, to have more thrusters doing the same thing as these thrusters. All you have to do is hook them up differently. I will go to that in a minute. But they do the same thing while producing more lift. If these 12 lifters are not enough to lift your plane up in the air, you just build more, and that's totally possible with that setup. So yeah, what will happen if we pitch the nose up, if we press the button for pitch up? The top row will light up. So overall we have more lift, and therefore the whole thing is pushed up in the air. And the same principle goes for the nose down key, the 8 key. It deactivates one row, and therefore the whole lift is decreased, and the thing starts going towards the ground slowly, which is what happens in the real plane. Okay, I didn't go into the detail, I forgot that, about how the rolling works in the real plane. So in the other plane we had the thrusters pointing upwards and downwards, and when one side fired downward, the other side would fire upward, and that rolled the plane into the turn. And apart from the little detail that the thrusters are not at the completely right spot for the job in terms of realism, because the roll forces act at this point where the ailerons sit, but it's good enough. They do basically the same job, and if you put the lifters here, it's just ugly, because the wing is only one block thick, and a big thruster sitting on that wing, you cannot hide it, and it just looks ugly. And as you see, I put a lot of love to detail in place here. I spent a lot of time building it as good as I could to look like the real thing, and I just couldn't get myself to do it and then put them here. So that's I had to compromise a bit, but that's good enough basically, because what happens is these things go up and down in flight, and they do it how do you say it, counteracting, like counter, I don't know, one side goes up and the other side goes down, and that's the roll control, because what happens is the oncoming air is accelerated upwards or downwards depending on the side of the roll, and it pushes the wing down, or really what it does altogether is it just reduces the lift on this side, on this wing. A little of the lift gets lost in this section, and on the other side, when you go and accelerate the air downwards here, we have more lift created on this side of the plane. So on the left there's a little bit of lift missing, and we have excessive lift on the right side, and that is what rolls the plane. And the way I try to solve this is just by basically shifting the lift while remaining the same, basically, because the sum of the lift gain and the lift loss is zero. So the overall lift doesn't change. It just basically it shifts from one side to the other, and that's exactly what I did here. So if you press 4 and 6, which are the roll buttons on my planes, if you press 4, which is roll left, you can see the lift is shifted to the right, which, because the center of gravity still is in the center, of the whole arrangement. The right side is lifted up more with more force than the left side, and so the left side starts to fall, and the right side starts to rise, and that's it. And you can do all the combinations of the bow. So pitch up and roll left and right, and pitch down and roll left and right, and that's it. It's simple. Uh, Connect these the 5T also with the thrusters in the back that resemble the ailerons. No, the ailerons are the roll things. How is it called? The elevators in the back, like the horizontal elevators. Connect them to those up and down. Thrusters and the left and right thrusters, which are not simulated here, but are nevertheless there. And then you have full flight controls. You need another, you need the thrust, and you're good to go basically. And it works surprisingly well. I must admit, I don't know, I'm struck because I did all this. I did some calculations before. It's a really not the I don't know, not the university stuff. It's really simple. It's fifth and sixth grade mathematics and physics. Um, all you have to do is determine the center of gravity, which I marked here. Yeah, I solved it this way. I built a crane, and I just took a random spot and put a bearing there so it could rotate freely, and put it on the crane, and then it would tilt to either side. And then I looked for a new point and tested this one. And originally, because the tail is so heavy, the center of gravity was a little bit to the back, and I shifted it. There's tons of formulas on the internet on how to calculate a shift of center of gravity, and I did it. I punched a number in, and I got a number out, which told me to increase the weight in the front, obviously, to move the center of gravity forward. And I just put a bunch of seats there because they're heavy, and coincidentally, it looks more like a real plane. At least half of the plane looks more like a real plane because we don't have the windows in the backside, because we got all that electrical stuff in there. Also the stuff that is still missing, and we have to leave room for that. So I might add some windows so it looks better, but we definitely won't have any seats in the back once this is done. Yeah, so one more thing I built before we are taking this in the air, just for the completion. I also wanted a light system that works like in a real plane. And in a real plane, we have these flashing lights on the wings, and a red light that flashes but slowly, indicating that the engines are running. And I solved this once with a mechanism, like with a rotating thing and sensors that would detect stuff that's rotating, and therefore sequencing the outputs. So this flashes 3 times and then pauses, and the other one just turns on and off in a certain frequency. But the problem with the other plane was I had to get rid of many bearings because it just caused so much lag. And I thought there has to be a better way to do this, not mechanically but digitally. And I'm surprised on how simple it was, because I figure I don't know much about logic gauge. I just started working with them, and all I know is how they work, so what they do, what goes in and what comes out. But it's not like I have read anything like in terms of the science behind it and what you can actually do and build loops and like certain algorithms that do stuff. I'm far from being that good. All I can do is build like a simple thing with a few timers and and some logic gates, and hardly get it to do what it's supposed to do. But in this case, it works surprisingly well, and also on the first try. So I have no idea why why I got this one so fast. But I'm happy. So what it does, it takes the input from the master key, which in my planes is always yellow. The master key basically turns on the whole thing. So if the master key is off, no matter what the sensors say, no matter what the control input, except for this one because the wiring is not perfect, so these can activate at any time, but it's not enough to do any damage to lift the plane off the ground when it's parked. So that's a minor inconvenience that I don't mind. I don't want to redo the whole thing because of this. So apart from that, it does its job. So anyway, it just takes the input from the master key. So once the master key is on, the thing will start to flash, and that's kind of how you do it in the real plane. Once you just start the whole thing up, and when you're ready to start the engines, you gotta get the flashy things on to let everybody know, hey, I'm being dangerous right here, and it's gonna start the old sucky and blowy. So we turn this on, and we are being warned. Flashy lights, three flashes and a pause, and just the old turning on and off slowly, and that's it. So yeah, before we take this in the air, I want to talk about what is missing on this plane, because there are still a few systems and things and details missing to make it behave like a real plane. For example, you can still hover this plane, not right from the spot, from the ground, but once you're in the air, you can hover this plane if you pitch up high enough. So it will not hover exactly, it will still rise a little bit, but this is something a real plane wouldn't do. So I thought I'd solve this by designing some kind of stall sensor, and this is where I'm at the moment. So I'm nearly not done to show. I can't show you anything. All I can do is tell you what my thoughts on that are so far. So I thought all I need to do basically is put a gyro anywhere and let it detect, or better, let sensors detect the roll of the plane. So whether it is in level flight or roll to either side, and detect the pitch of the plane. So either it's straight or nose up or nose down. And the reason for that is I wanted to design a stall sensor that says, okay, if the nose is up in this plane and there is no power involved, so there's no thrust that pulls the plane up the hill, it has to stall at some stage. So it has to be some kind of logic that checks if the nose is up and if we have a certain amount of power applied. And if we don't have a certain amount of power applied, a timer would go off, a warning horn, and once a certain time has passed, it would just cut the lift or part of the lift, so the plane starts falling out of the sky if you don't act and put in some power and lower the nose. So that sounds quite simple, and I really hope it will be this simple. And the second thing is, we need sensors to detect the roll, because the second problem I run into when test flying these planes was that if you are turning and you are like rolled to an angle towards the turn, obviously what happens is the thrust doesn't, the lifting thrust doesn't go straight up anymore. It goes at an angle. and it can be split into separate like forces. And what happens is we have one force that's part of the lift, or of the lifting force, that pulls or pushes the plane towards the center of the turn, which is good. It's what we want. We want to turn around, and we need a force doing that. But what also happens is the vector of the lift, which is still pointing straight up, the partial vector of the lift, has decreased, and the weight is still pointing straight downwards, and it is now bigger than the lift. And so what happens is, any way you turn, you start losing altitude unless you increase the lift. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it to this point, but I have an idea on how it could work. So the sensors that detect the roll of the plane, they will activate, and I probably put this here on this lifter grid that I did. This will activate a row of lifters that produce excessive lift for the wings as soon as we enter a certain angle of roll, a certain angle of bank, and keep it this way for as long as we keep that angle of bank, and stop as soon as we go level again, because this is what happens in the real plane. If you roll into a turn, you have to also pull back on the stick any turn you do, because if you don't, this is exactly what happens. The nose will drop and you will enter descent. So you have to actively increase the angle of attack on the wing by pushing the tail downwards to create this excessive lift. And mathematically, for like how's the triangle math called? I don't know. If you have an angle of bank of 60 degrees, the lift of the wings to compensate for the weight and the force pulling you inside the turn has to be twice as much as it is in straight and level flights. You have to produce a lot of lift with these wings. And yeah, so that's one more problem I need to solve. And to this day still, if I go, a shallow turn works because you can compensate that a little bit because the platform for the lifters is tilted. Yeah, I should probably tell you why. So you can compensate by pitching up a bit, but it doesn't work for steeper turns, and you will start to descend. And I think we should get rid of that. Yeah. So yeah, the last thing, why the lift pad is tilted. I did this only because of yeah, just realism reasons. I wanted to behave more like a plane, and what this has two effects. These which are both desirable, I would say. The first effect is that you, no matter what you do, if you are straight, you always have a little bit of the thrust pointing backwards, so pushing you forwards. So you can't really hover this plane when you go for normal, a normal state of flight, and not pushing it upwards. Yeah, you always have a force going forward. So the actual force of the whole lifter system is bigger than the weight force, but the partial force going downwards is roughly equal to the weight force. So in this configuration, which is actually the flaps up configuration for the normal flight, we have a little force pushing us forward, and a big portion of the force just holding the altitude, just as long as we are in level flight and not rolled into one direction, as I just mentioned. And yeah, what happens, because this is tiltable and has two settings, which are connected to the flaps actually. Um, what happens once you lower the flaps and go into landing and takeoff configuration? It tilts it more. It tilts it just a bit more. So I think it's 18 degrees by default and going another 7 degrees more when you lower the flaps. And I guess at first glance this is counterintuitive, because when you lower the flaps in the rear plane, you do it because you want uh, like it does so much. It makes the wing, if it goes back and down, it makes the wing longer. You have a longer just more bent wing, and all of this is to increase the lift created by the wing. So this is because then you can go slower. If you have increased the lift, you can decrease on the speed to essentially have the same amount of lift in the end. And this is what flaps do, basically. And the way this works this way in my plane is because when you fly in this configuration and you have a level flight, the force pointing downwards is not enough to keep the plane in the air. So what you will have to do is you have to pitch the nose a bit up, so this is straightened out. So actually it's the 7 degrees which we pitch down on this one, we have to pitch up with the nose, and that will hold our altitude. And then it looks like the real plane, because if the real plane goes slower, you have to pitch up a bit to maintain the altitude, and this is what this does. And also it's for lower power settings, so you can basically, if you cut the power completely on the engines, and we will have to do that in the flight now because I don't have a throttle system yet. I only can turn on and off the engines. And if we turn off the engines, what actually happens, if we keep the plane straight like this, it will enter a shallow descent, just like a real plane that starts gliding. Even a big plane like the 737 will, if you shut off the engines, not fall out of the sky, but it will rather enter a glide, a shallow descent, depending on which plane it is. Obviously, if you have a glider plane, this is optimized for this, and it has a real shallow path of descent, and a big chunk of metal like this has a steeper path of descent, but still the same principles apply for both types of planes, and it will ever so gently start descending. And this is what this does. It will enter descent because the lifting force is not enough to counteract the weighting force, but at the same time it will still be pushed forward. So actually it won't slow down much, but just it will behave just like a car rolling down a hill. And all you have to do, if you want to make the descent more shallow, is raise the nose a bit, because then a bigger portion of the downward thrust is of the lifting thrust is directed downwards, and therefore we have more lift. And actually, with the engines cut, it will slow down, but not slow down completely, and do a more shallow descent. So once you're near the runway and you start to flare, all you have to do is lift the nose, which will kill the downward speed if you do it at the right point, and you will go level again, while at the same time slowing down, because the pushing force of the pushing part of the lifting force will not be sufficient to keep up a good speed, and it will just gently touch down on the runway. And the way this logic works is as soon as you touch the ground, the lift is cut off anyways, so no thrust and no lift, and the plane will just roll out on the runway wherever you put it. Maybe I will add uh, another set of thrusters to do reverse thrusters, just to sort of first to make it more maneuverable on the ground, so you can go backwards, and also to slow you down on the runway, because for a short runway like this one in this case, except especially if you have obstacles in the approach path, I usually end up pretty high, and yeah, so more often than not, I get an overrun. I have to go around, or I just overrun, and I have to use the lift to get her out of the dirt. So yeah, a kind of braking system would also be nice. But yeah, I think I'm gonna show you this over here. So the way this logic works is, as I said before, but probably no one can remember. These sensors resemble the front gear and main gear sensors and takeoff power sensors. And this yellow light indicates the main switch, the main whole grid switch. And this one I don't use in the setup, so it's just black. And yeah, we can use this to go just through the procedure of taking off and looking at what's happening in the process. So what's happening when you're taking off is, as in this case, both of the sensors, of course, sense the ground, and the master switches on, and you're ready to go, and you apply the takeoff power, you pull back, and this will eventually lift the front gear off the ground, and so you have all the lift. And then you fly around, it's all happy and dandy. The main gear sensor will, of course, also not sense the ground anymore, since we're in the air, and from that point on, it doesn't matter which power settings you have, as long as the ground sensor doesn't activate on the main wheels. You can do anything, and the lift will stay on. And as soon, let's say we flew around and we landed up with the runway, and we were on the approach, and all the sensors are off, and obviously we don't have much power applied, and we're descending onto the runway. And as soon as we touch the runway, the sensor senses the ground, and the lift is cut off. And then, of course, the nose gear touches the ground, and we have a successful landing. So, and that's all that happens here. We have one sensor for the main wheels, which is plugged in here. As you can see, this is the back side here, where all the input is marked by the eye here. And yeah, the nose gear sensor, and in this case the 2 key directly, because I don't have a throttle system, and so all I can give the sensor is, yes, we have power applied, and yes, no, we don't. And that's all there is. I have a AD converter for the rudder system, and yeah, I will build, like in the other plane, some sort of throttle system that's connected to the W and S key, so you can actually control these 8 in sequence. And I will indicate, like in the other plane, this with these lights here that will light up in sequence and indicate which power setting we have. So I think to finish this off, we will just do a quick flight around. There's another runway over there, and yeah, still it's not done yet. That's why I have the seat up here, because we can have a good overview over what's happening around the plane, and also we can go, if we need to, inside the plane and look at what's happening. So in this case, the master key is not pressed, and now it is pressed. We can check all that, and yeah, just look for what's happening. And also we have a good first-person view that gives us a nice forward, but also a bit down view, so you can see what's happening, but also in the back and into all directions. And it's good enough for the flight test. So you see there's some parts of the body still missing because I need to get in and out a lot of times. And actually I have a door here on the plane, but it gets stuck a lot. That was the problem also with the first plane I built, that especially the bearings, which were long way from the center of turning, from the center of gravity, they will just glitch into each other and get stuck. So yeah, that's the reason I'm flying from the roof at this stage. So just so we can see all that's happening, that's important. So the first thing you notice when we press the master key is the flashing white lights are on now, the position lights and the beacon lights, which are you can barely see it in the light of day, but the red light on the top of the roof is lit, and also the red light on the bottom of the plane is lit. And that indicates that we are ready to start the engine, and that's what we did. We say the engines are running now. Did I lower the flaps? I think I did. Yeah, this raises the flaps so you can see it from the outside, but also you can see it from the inside. The thrust pad is turning. Also you can see the light thingy doing its job here. And yeah, I'm actually kind of proud of how clean this all looks at this stage. So we only have, apart from like crude stuff in the back that's still not the final version. Apart from that, we have really cleaned up setup here that does everything it's supposed to, while still not being too bulky and ugly. So yeah, I think we're on a good way here, and I'm gonna finish off with just showing you how far I've come so far, and hopefully going from here and finishing up this thing so it flies like a real Boeing, and hopefully make many people happy. So okay, the master key is on, the master switch is on, and we need to straighten out a bit. So I don't know if I have mentioned this, but just for that I said everything that's important. These thrusters here that rotate the plane, that yaw the plane, are connected to the ground sensor and will only activate if it's on the ground. Yeah, I think I said that. So on the ground, it turns slowly, but it still turns better than my other plane, and especially, and this will be easier once we have the incremental thrust that can do a little thrust rather than all of the thrust. You see, once it starts rolling, it just rotates so much faster. So the real thing can turn a little bit more on the spot still, but I think for the time I've spent on this, this is actually quite nice. It is quite agile, and also once you're in the air and only the thrusters in the back are active, this also works surprisingly well. And yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna show you how this works. So actually, I just told you without further ado, but I have one more important thing, which is also important for designing a plane, any kind of plane really. As you see, the center of gravity is in front of the main wheels, which is actually important because otherwise the plane will ever so slightly tilt up and end up on its tail. We don't want that, so we have to have the center of gravity a little bit, or a little bit more, depending on the plane, in front of the main gear, so it doesn't tip, and that poses a slight problem, a little problem for us, because once you're in the air, everything rotates around this point. So we don't need a lot of thrusting power because we have a long arm to the point of rotation, and it works well. It works well in combination with the lift thrusters, but on the ground we don't have that. So in order to rotate the plane, normally one way to solve this would be like with the yaw steering, to have thrusters in the front that only activate on the ground to assist that. But I didn't want that because there is no force in real life that lifts the front of the plane. So I didn't want that. But actually, what actually worked in my favor, and I think it is also how it works in part in real life, is that although the thrusters were not on their own powerful enough to push the tail down while on the ground, because we have this as the center of turning, but this as the center of weight. So it constantly tries to turn this, to tip this, and the reason this doesn't happen is because there's the nose wheel stopping the rotation. But when we push this up and delete the lift, it will tilt back to its position around this point, and this poses a problem for us in that way that it this force, the force created here, is not enough to tilt the whole thing around this point. It's enough to tilt it around this point, but not around this point. But so obviously we cannot lift the nose off the ground if we are standing still, which is good, because we cannot do that in the real plane either, because we have to have a certain amount of airspeed for the whole force to build up big enough to do the job. Yeah. So what helps us in this situation is, although you cannot pitch up the nose on its own, once you set the takeoff power, this big thrust vector actually helps us, because it's below the center of gravity, and therefore not only does it pull the whole thing forward, but also it does a rotational force, because it's connected to the plane, and everything acts on this point of gravity. It causes a rotation upwards that persists as long as this force is active. So the only way in this plane to get it off the ground is to have a high power setting and pushing the tail down at the same time, and that will enable us to deactivate this sensor, and in turn turn on the lifters, and in turn again get us off the ground. And in theory that works quite well. We have some problems sometimes with runways like this, because they are, I don't know why, because they're elevated off the ground, and in this case because there are holes in it because of the lights, but also on closed surfaces I got that the ground sensors sometimes don't pick up on the blocks, and therefore activate the lifters in times when it shouldn't. And you can solve this by just turning off the master key until you're ready to go flying again. But that's just a minor inconvenience. And most of the time, I hope it works, and I hope we can use this length of runway to get in the air. Should be enough. You can rotate. You can start rotating pretty much as soon as you apply the thrusting force, the pushing force forward. So we don't use a lot of runway, but still we need some sort of run before we are able to get it off the ground. So I'm happy with that. It's realistic. You cannot just take off in the forest or anything. You cannot just start hover out and then go forward. You have to have a certain clearance on the ground, and also after you took off, because you cannot go straight up. Actually, you can, but in the future you won't be able to do it because there is going to be a stall sensor. So finally, and without further ado, we're gonna do this. So the main switch is on, and we can just turn on the takeoff power, and already at this point start the rotation. And it rotates, and now we're off, and we cleared the trees. Thank God. Okay, and now it's just flying. It's just the different forces doing their thing. So if the force on the right is greater than on the left, it will roll. And this was probably not a good idea, because we lost a lot of lift here, and also I didn't. Oh my God. So yeah, these are the obvious issues. Also, I'm not sure about the whole bent wings thing. I think it looks good. It looks better than the straight wing thing, because it looks more like the real plane with the bent wings. But it sorry, on impact with the ground or anything, it just starts to jitter and look shitty, and I don't know if I want that, so I might go back to the fixed wing setup. But yeah, let's see what the future brings. But yeah, apart from that, you can just fly it like a normal plane. Roll it inside the turn with the yaw, and roll it back to get straight. Also pull up to climb, and pitch down to descent. It's all I did is add the forces together that are there from the beginning in the real thing. So there's no magic involved. It's really a no-brainer. So I don't know why. I still feel kind of proud that this worked so well, and it looks decent. So I'm very happy about that. But at the end of the day, I don't want any kind of medal for it, because it's just basic physics copied from the real thing. It's just copy and paste of the real life. And yeah, so all that's left to do basically is find the runway again. I forgot where I was going, so I think the runway is around the next corner. I have a runway right next to the wall, so there's not much problems with trees or anything in the vicinity. So it's actually a bit easier to land there, especially in this early stage of of the development, where the steering is not perfect, but still it works quite well. And I think it will get much better once we have the roll sensors and roll thing installed, where the lift is increased inside the turn. I think that will help out a lot, because in situations like this we can just roll more and do a steeper turn and not lose any altitude in the process of doing so. So yeah, the runway is coming up. Luckily, I cut the power, I lowered the flaps, so now we are just gliding and having no engine power whatsoever. But still, we're going down the hill, we're descending, and hopefully this will be enough to. I'm just gonna impact her here on the runway, and this is not enough. So yeah, let's just go for a quick go around here. And I thought we can wait for a place without rocks, but they just keep spawning in. So screw it, I'm just gonna put it down here. And the lift is cut, and we can roll out. So yeah, at this stage of development, it flies surprisingly well. It just handles good. One problem is if you if you yaw for a long period of time, so when you have a long turn, it tends to go into oversteering and just start to flip the tail around. Um, Basically because probably because of the curved flight path and all that forces acting there, and we have a heavy tail that's just dragged, that it's just being dragged out of the turn. And I think it just like in a car that's tail heavy, eventually this will snap and just fling the tail around slowly, but still. So we got to be careful with that, and sometimes just cut these thrusters and give it a little pause of a split second and then start again, and that will reset the whole thing. And yeah, we can do a nice coordinated turn, and that's basically it. Yeah, so thanks for watching this one. I think it was a long one. I didn't even watch the clock on this one. If you made it to this point, be proud of yourself. I guess it was a lot of, I don't know, grammatical errors and arts and just, I don't know. I don't do this very often. I just thought this a video would be the easiest way for me to actually explain what I did for you guys, and so you can, yeah, build a similar thing if you want to, or to take this principle and improve it. This would absolutely be the best case, because I know this thing, although it flies good, it's far from perfect. It still has a lot of flaws, and sometimes will just fall out of the sky and be uncontrollable. And hopefully, in the future, we will have this all figured out and have a decent flying plane. Yeah, but that's it for today. And once again, if you made it to this point, congratulations. I don't know why you did it. What's up? Don't you have anything better to do? But still, thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to anyone commenting on this and giving their 2 cents on the whole airplane flying thing and flying dynamics thing and how they would solve it. And yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.